"Please don't come inside," the widow warned the dangerous cowboy who desperately wanted her. The house, though old, had been full of memories, and she kept every corner as a reminder of the life she once shared with her late husband. She woke early each morning, letting the sun warm her face as she walked through the small garden behind the house. The soil was rich, and the vegetables and flowers she grew were her pride. Each plant reminded her that life, even after loss, could continue and thrive if nurtured with care. The neighbors rarely came by, respecting her solitude. The few townspeople who stopped often offered polite smiles or friendly waves, but no one lingered long enough to disturb her peace. Clara had become used to the quiet, though sometimes the silence felt heavier than the work of the farm. There were evenings when she would sit by the window, knitting or reading, and feel the emptiness of the house pressing in around her. She would glance at the empty chair where her husband used to sit and imagine his presence, the familiar sound of his voice, and the warmth of his hand holding hers. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Clara noticed dust rising along the dirt road that ran past her property. At first, she thought it was just a traveler passing through, perhaps a farmer heading to the next town. But as the dust cloud drew closer, she realized it was someone unusual. Riding a horse that looked strong and untamed, a man approached, his figure outlined by the orange glow of the setting sun. He wore a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes and a long coat that flapped slightly in the wind. His movements were confident, almost commanding, as if the world were meant to notice him wherever he went. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. She had heard stories about men like him, travelers, drifters, cowboys who carried danger in their eyes and unpredictability in their steps. Her father had once warned her about people who seemed charming but lived by their own rules, often leaving chaos in their wake. Yet there was something different about this man. He didn't rush or shout, and he didn't appear threatening in the usual ways. Still, instinct told her to be cautious. When he reached the gate of her farm, he stopped and studied the property carefully. Clara stepped forward, her voice firm despite the flutter of anxiety in her chest. "Please don't come inside," she called. She kept her hands visible, resting lightly on the wooden fence between them, hoping her tone conveyed both warning and seriousness. The man lifted his head slightly, revealing piercing eyes that seemed to look right into her thoughts. For a moment, he didn't speak, simply tipping his hat in a gesture that felt almost polite despite the danger she sensed in him. Then, in a voice deep and calm, he replied, "I don't mean any harm. I just need a moment to speak with you." Clara tightened her grip on the fence. Something about the way he said it made her heart beat faster, not out of attraction but out of caution. She had learned over the years that words could be used to soften a threat, to hide intentions that were far from gentle. Still, curiosity mixed with apprehension compelling her to respond. "I said no. This is private property. You need to leave." The man nodded, but he did not move. He seemed willing to wait, a quiet determination in his posture. Clara felt a mix of frustration and unease. Who was he, and why was he so insistent? She glanced around, making sure her dogs were nearby. They were small, protective, and loyal, but they weren't trained for strangers. The man noticed her glance and smiled faintly, a gesture that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. He spoke again, softer this time. "I've been looking for someone who won't just see me as trouble. I heard about you, and I thought maybe I could talk." Clara's mind raced. She had heard whispers in town about men who wandered into people's lives and left storms behind. But this man, this cowboy, seemed different, though dangerous in ways she couldn't yet understand. She stepped back slightly, keeping the fence between them. "I don't know what you've heard, but you need to leave. I live alone. I like it that way. I don't need visitors, especially not ones who come with stories I don't want to hear." The cowboy tipped his hat again and remained silent, as if considering her words. Clara's heart beat fast, a strange mix of fear and intrigue stirring inside her. Who was he really? Why did he seem so drawn to her? And why did she feel an odd pull to understand him, even though every instinct screamed to stay away? Days passed, and the man did not disappear. Clara would see him riding slowly past the edge of her property, his eyes occasionally meeting hers from a distance. Sometimes he would leave small tokens, a wildflower, a piece of fruit from the roadside, a carefully folded note, always just beyond her reach. Clara found herself conflicted. She was drawn to the mystery of him, yet she kept reminding herself that she could not let him inside, literally or emotionally. At night, Clara would lie awake, thinking about the man with the rugged face and dangerous reputation. She imagined conversations they might have, arguments they might fight, and moments of laughter that could break through her solitude. She tried to push these thoughts away, knowing they were dangerous. The world outside her farm had taught her lessons about trust and the cost of letting strangers into one's life. But there was also a strange hope that grew quietly, like a tiny seed in her chest. Perhaps this man could bring something different, not destruction, but change. Perhaps he could be a challenge that awakened her, made her feel alive in ways she hadn't since her husband's death. She shook her head each time the thought came, reminding herself to stay cautious, to keep the fence between them, and to protect the life she had carefully rebuilt. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills and painted the sky with shades of pink and orange, Clara stood at her gate once more. The man approached slowly, his horse moving with a quiet grace. He stopped at the usual distance, nodded respectfully, and spoke in that calm, steady voice. "I know you're cautious, I understand, but I want you to know that I won't leave until you hear me out." Clara's hands tightened on the wooden fence. She looked into his eyes, seeing the raw honesty that seemed to lie beneath the rugged exterior. Something inside her shifted. She knew that tonight, as with many nights before, she would not open the gate. But she also realized that the story of her quiet life was about to change. The night settled in, cool and still, with the stars beginning to shine overhead. Clara returned to her chores, glancing back once to see the cowboy sitting silently on his horse, waiting. And though she did not yet know what the future held, she felt a strange sense of anticipation, a feeling that life, even after loss, could bring unexpected encounters that tested courage, boundaries, and the heart itself. Jace, the cowboy, was not the type of man to give up easily. Known in the county for his rough reputation and fearless nature, he had wandered from town to town, earning a name that brought both awe and caution. But when he first saw Clara, everything changed. She was unlike anyone he had ever met. Her quiet strength, the way she moved through her days with purpose yet carried the weight of loss in her eyes, drew him in more than he could explain. It wasn't desire alone. It was a need he didn't fully understand, a pull that seemed to tie his restless spirit to her lonely farm. At first, he tried to ignore it. He had always lived by his own rules, never stopping for anyone, but Clara's image lingered in his mind. He saw her tending the garden, brushing the dust from her sleeves, pausing to look at the horizon as if waiting for someone who would never return. And every time he thought about leaving, he found himself riding back, staying just outside her gate, watching from a respectful distance. Clara, meanwhile, remained wary. She had heard the stories about Jace, how he had tangled with men far more dangerous than himself, and how women had been warned to keep their distance. Every instinct screamed caution, yet there was something about his persistence that puzzled her. He never demanded entry, never tried to force her hand. Instead, he lingered on the edges of her life, a constant presence she couldn't quite ignore. Days turned into weeks and Jace developed a routine. He would ride past her farm every morning, tipping his hat in greeting. Sometimes he would call out over the fence, speaking softly about the weather, the town, or a distant place he had once traveled. He didn't ask for anything, didn't make promises, and never crossed the line. It was clear to Clara that he wasn't a man looking to conquer or claim. He was simply trying to understand her, to earn a place in her life without forcing it. Clara's curiosity, however, was mixed with frustration. She did not want to like him. She did not want to feel the flutter in her chest when she saw his figure in the distance, or the way her thoughts lingered on him long after he had ridden away. She reminded herself daily that she had built her life carefully, that her late husband's memory deserved respect, and that strangers, no matter how charming, were often trouble. Yet she found herself talking to him across the fence, answering his simple questions with cautious politeness, and sometimes even laughing quietly at his subtle humor. One afternoon, a small incident changed the rhythm of their interactions. Clara's horse had been startled by a sudden gust of wind, rearing up and nearly throwing her to the ground. Jace, who had been riding nearby, acted without hesitation. He galloped to her side, steadying the horse and helping Clara regain her footing. She had not expected him to intervene, and the intensity of the moment left her heart racing. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice firm but gentle. Clara nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "Yes, thank you," she replied, trying to keep her composure. He didn't linger, didn't try to prolong the moment beyond necessity. He simply nodded and returned to the edge of the property, as if respecting the invisible boundary she had set. But something had shifted. Clara noticed, for the first time, that he wasn't just persistent. He was attentive, careful, and genuinely concerned for her safety. It was a side of him she hadn't expected to see in a man with such a dangerous reputation. As the weeks continued, Jace began leaving small gifts for her, always just out of reach. A hand-picked wildflower, a neatly folded note with a kind word, a piece of fruit from a distant orchard. These gestures were simple, yet they carried meaning. Clara found herself looking forward to them, even though she scolded herself for it. Each gift was a silent promise, a demonstration of patience and respect that contrasted sharply with the rough, wild image she had of him. Despite her growing awareness of him, Clara remained cautious. She knew that trusting a stranger, even one who seemed harmless, could be dangerous. She set clear boundaries, keeping him at a distance, and insisted on her independence. Yet every day, Jace's quiet determination chipped away at the wall she had built around herself. She began to see that there was more to him than the stories in town suggested. Behind the rugged exterior was a man shaped by hardship, capable of loyalty, courage, and perhaps love. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Clara found herself standing at the edge of her garden. Jace appeared, riding slowly along the dirt road, his hat tilted slightly and a faint smile on his face. He stopped at the usual distance, and for a moment neither spoke. The silence was comfortable, almost familiar, as if they had been communicating this way for years. "You've been busy," he said finally, nodding toward her garden. "I have work to do," Clara replied, her tone neutral. Yet she felt a warmth at his presence, a subtle reassurance that he wasn't a threat. "I can see that," he said. "You take care of this place well." "It's impressive." Clara felt a small blush rise to her cheeks. Compliments from strangers were rare, and from him they carried weight. "It's just a garden," she said, trying to downplay the praise. "Not just a garden," he replied quietly. "It's life. You care for it. You nurture it. That takes strength." His words struck a chord. Clara had always taken pride in her independence, but rarely had anyone acknowledged the effort, resilience, and care that went into her daily life. She found herself looking at him differently, noticing the subtle honesty in his eyes, the patience in his movements, and the sincerity in his voice. Over the next few days, their conversations grew longer. Jace began asking about her past, not in a prying way but with genuine curiosity. He listened attentively as she spoke of her husband, of the hardships she had faced, and the quiet joys that sustained her. Clara, in turn, began to learn more about him. He spoke of a life on the road, of family he had lost, of mistakes he regretted, and the loneliness that had followed him for years. Through these exchanges, a cautious bond began to form. Clara still kept her distance, still insisted on her boundaries, but she could feel the wall around her heart slowly loosening. Jace's persistence was not forceful or demanding. It was patient, consistent, and respectful. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, life could bring companionship again, even after profound loss. Yet fear remained. Clara knew the risks of letting a man like Jace get too close. His reputation was well known, and the town would judge her if she allowed herself to become involved. But she also realized that the man standing outside her gate was not defined by rumors. He was his own person, and she had the right to decide how much of him to allow into her life. One late afternoon, as the wind carried the scent of wildflowers through the air, Clara found herself speaking more freely than she had in months. Jace listened quietly, nodding occasionally, never interrupting, never rushing her. The trust between them grew slowly, carefully, like the delicate plants in her garden. And while she could not yet allow him inside her home, she realized that a door had opened within her heart, a door that had been closed for far too long. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the farm, Clara looked at Jace and felt a mix of apprehension and curiosity. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that their lives were now intertwined in ways she could not ignore. The dangerous cowboy who had first appeared at her gate had become a constant presence in her world, challenging her fears, her solitude, and her heart. And though she would not yet invite him inside, she understood that some boundaries were meant to be tested, and some encounters were meant to change the course of life in ways she could never have imagined. The night came suddenly, with dark clouds rolling across the sky and the wind carrying the distant rumble of thunder. Clara had been working in her garden, pulling weeds and tending to the vegetables, when the first drops of rain began to fall. She looked up at the sky, realizing the storm would reach her farm sooner than expected. The horses in the stable were restless, snorting and stamping their hooves, and Clara hurried inside, closing the doors tightly behind her. Just as she settled in, she heard the familiar sound of hooves on the dirt road. Her heart sank. Standing in the doorway, soaked from head to toe, was Jace, the cowboy she had kept at a distance for weeks. His hat was drenched, and water ran down the edges of his coat, clinging to his body. He looked dangerous and vulnerable at the same time, and Clara could feel her resolve wavering. "I need shelter," he said, his voice steady despite the storm. "I won't stay long, but I can't ride through this." Clara's first instinct was to refuse. "I told you not to come inside," she exclaimed, her voice shaking with frustration and worry. She could feel the tension rising between them, the invisible walls she had built around herself straining under his presence. She knew that letting him in could change everything, her safety, her solitude, and the careful life she had rebuilt. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something she hadn't noticed before: desperation. It wasn't arrogance or bravado, it was the raw human need for shelter, warmth, and understanding. Clara's heart softened, even though her mind screamed caution. She stepped aside, gesturing to the doorway. "Fine, just for a moment," she said, keeping her tone firm. Jace nodded, grateful but respectful, and stepped inside. Water dripped from his coat, pooling on the wooden floor, and Clara grabbed a towel from the nearby rack. She hesitated for a moment, then handed it to him. Their fingers brushed briefly, and Clara felt a spark she couldn't explain. She quickly withdrew her hand, reminding herself that boundaries were important. The storm raged outside, lightning flashing across the sky and thunder shaking the walls. Jace sat quietly in the corner of the room, his eyes scanning the small space, taking in the simple furniture, the photographs on the wall, and the careful orderliness of the home. He didn't touch anything, didn't speak unless necessary. Clara watched him closely, noting the way he respected her space even in her home. "You've done well here," he said finally, his voice low but sincere. "It's not easy to keep a place like this running alone." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest, though she tried to hide it. "It's just life," she replied quietly. "I manage." For a long moment they sat in silence, listening to the rain pounding on the roof. Clara's mind raced with thoughts of the storm outside and the storm that seemed to have entered her heart. She reminded herself that Jace was dangerous, that the town whispered about him, that his reputation could bring trouble into her life. Yet the man in front of her was not the one she had feared. He was patient, calm, and genuine, showing a side of himself that few had seen. As the storm continued, Jace spoke softly, telling stories of his travels and the hardships he had faced. Clara listened, intrigued despite herself. She realized that beneath his rugged exterior was a man who had endured loneliness, loss, and challenges that had shaped him into who he was. She felt a connection forming, fragile but undeniable, between their two worlds, the quiet, careful life she had built and the untamed, unpredictable life he carried with him. Hours passed, and the rain showed no sign of stopping. Clara found herself offering him a simple meal, and though she kept her distance, she noticed the subtle way he appreciated her efforts. He didn't ask for anything, didn't make demands. He simply shared the space with her, respecting the boundaries she had set while silently proving that he could be trusted. Yet the tension between them remained. Clara felt it in the way he looked at her, in the quiet pauses between words, in the moments when their hands accidentally brushed. There was a pull she couldn't ignore, a mix of fear and curiosity that left her heart racing. She struggled to remind herself that desire was dangerous, that letting him in further could open doors she wasn't ready to face. The storm outside mirrored the storm within her. Lightning illuminated the room, casting shadows on the walls, and for a moment Clara felt as if the world had narrowed down to just the two of them. She glanced at Jace, noticing the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the subtle tension in his body that matched her own. She realized that their connection was no longer just curiosity or politeness. It was something deeper, something neither of them could easily ignore. "You don't have to stay," she said finally, breaking the silence. "You can leave whenever you want. I won't stop you." Jace shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible smile on his face. "I'm not leaving," he said quietly. "Not yet. Not while this storm is out there, and not while I'm still figuring things out with you." Clara's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to argue, to remind him of her warnings, to maintain the wall she had built around herself. But she didn't. She realized that the man before her wasn't just persistent, he was sincere. And for the first time in months, she allowed herself to consider the possibility that trust, even with someone so dangerous, might not be impossible. The night grew darker, and the rain showed no sign of stopping. They sat together, sharing stories and quiet moments, the world outside fading away. Clara noticed the subtle ways he respected her boundaries, the patience in his voice, and the honesty in his eyes. She realized that danger didn't always arrive in loud, violent ways. It could come softly, persistently, and insistently, challenging her fears and making her confront her own desires. By the time the storm began to subside, a fragile understanding had formed between them. Clara knew that this night had changed everything. The lines she had drawn, the careful rules she had set, were no longer absolute. She still maintained her independence, still insisted on caution, but she also felt a sense of connection that she had not experienced in years. As the first rays of dawn broke through the clouds, Clara walked to the door and watched Jace prepare to leave. He looked at her, a mixture of gratitude, longing, and something tender in his gaze. "Thank you," he said simply, tipping his hat. Clara nodded, feeling a strange warmth despite the exhaustion and tension of the night. "Be careful," she replied, her voice soft but firm. He mounted his horse and rode slowly down the road, pausing once to glance back at her. Clara returned inside, closing the door and leaning against it, feeling a mix of relief, fear, and anticipation. She knew that Jace's presence in her life was not over. The storm had passed outside, but the storm of emotions, questions, and possibilities had only just begun. Throughout the following days, Clara found herself thinking constantly about that night. She reflected on the trust they had begun to build, the moments of vulnerability they had shared, and the undeniable pull between them. She understood that danger could take many forms, not only physical but emotional, challenging her to open her heart and confront feelings she had long kept buried. Jace, too, could not forget that night. For him, it had been a revelation. Clara was not a woman to be won with force, charm, or reputation. She required patience, respect, and understanding. And for the first time, he realized that he wanted more than a fleeting connection. He wanted to be a part of her life, to prove that he could be trusted, and to find a place where he truly belonged. As the farm returned to its usual rhythm, with chickens clucking and the wind rustling through the trees, both Clara and Jace understood that their journey was only beginning. The lines between caution and desire, fear and trust, had been tested, and both had felt the tension of hearts pressed against walls built long ago. The next steps would require even more patience, understanding, and courage, but the bond that had begun in the storm had planted a seed that might one day grow into something neither of them had thought possible. The days that followed the storm were calm but filled with subtle tension. Clara moved through her routine with a renewed sense of awareness. She tended the garden with the same care as always, but her mind kept drifting to Jace. The cowboy's presence lingered, not physically, but in her thoughts, in the quiet moments when the house felt too silent or the wind rustled through the trees. She realized that her feelings for him were growing, slowly and quietly, despite her insistence that she remain cautious. Jace, too, found himself drawn to the farm more often, though he respected Clara's space. He would ride past her property in the mornings, tipping his hat with a small smile. Sometimes he would leave a gift, a bundle of fresh herbs, a carefully tied bundle of firewood, or a hand-picked flower. Each gesture was simple, yet it carried meaning. Clara could feel his patience, his effort to show kindness without intruding. She found herself looking forward to these small signs, even as she scolded herself for allowing thoughts of him to enter her heart. One afternoon, Clara noticed a group of clouds gathering on the horizon. The air was heavy, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of another storm. She was in the garden when she heard the familiar sound of hooves. Jace appeared, riding slowly, as if he had anticipated the approaching weather. His horse moved with a quiet confidence, and Jace's posture was relaxed yet alert. He stopped at the usual distance, his eyes meeting hers across the fence. "You look tired," he said, his voice calm but concerned. Clara shook her head, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I'm fine, just preparing for the weather." He studied her for a moment, then dismounted and approached the fence carefully. "I can help," he offered. "I know how to secure a farm against a storm. You don't have to do it alone." Clara hesitated. Accepting his help would mean letting him into her world in a way she wasn't yet ready for. But she also knew that the storm could damage the garden and the small outbuildings if precautions weren't taken. Reluctantly, she nodded. "All right, but stay where I can see you." Together, they moved through the farm, securing gates, checking the animals, and reinforcing the garden. The work was quiet, interrupted only by the occasional gust of wind or distant rumble of thunder. As they labored side by side, Clara noticed small details about Jace she had not paid attention to before. The careful way he handled the animals, the gentle tone he used when speaking to the chickens, the quiet respect he showed to her home. She realized that the man who had once seemed dangerous and unpredictable was patient, attentive, and deeply considerate. After securing the farm, they stood together at the edge of the property, watching as the first drops of rain began to fall. Clara felt a sense of relief mixed with an unexpected warmth. She had allowed Jace into her life, even if only temporarily, and it had felt safe. More than that, it had felt right. She realized that trust could be built slowly, through shared experiences and small gestures, rather than words alone. Over the next several weeks, their relationship continued to develop. They spent time together in quiet ways, Jace helping with repairs, Clara sharing meals, and both of them talking about their lives. Clara learned about the hardships Jace had faced growing up, the mistakes he had made, and the loneliness that had followed him. She saw a side of him that few people had the chance to witness, his vulnerability, his honesty, and his capacity for care. Jace, in turn, learned about Clara's life before the farm, about her late husband, and the challenges she had overcome. He came to understand the strength and resilience she possessed, and he admired the way she carried herself despite the loss she had endured. Their conversations were often quiet, but they were filled with meaning. Each story shared, each laugh exchanged, and each moment of understanding built a connection that neither could ignore. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with warm hues, Clara found herself sitting on the porch, a cup of tea in her hands. Jace was nearby, repairing a broken fence post. She watched him work, noticing the careful movements and the concentration in his eyes. There was a quiet beauty in the way he approached his tasks, a reflection of the patience and thoughtfulness that had gradually drawn her in. "You're good at this," Clara said softly, breaking the silence. Jace looked up, a small smile on his face. "I've had to be," he replied. "Life on the road teaches you to fix things that matter before they break completely." Clara nodded, feeling a connection she could not fully explain. "I suppose we all have to learn that," she said, her voice quiet but thoughtful. As the days passed, their bond deepened. They shared stories of childhood memories, hopes for the future, and small fears they rarely admitted to anyone. Clara found herself opening up in ways she had not for years, trusting Jace with thoughts and feelings she had kept buried. And Jace, for the first time, realized that he wanted to be part of someone's life in a way that went beyond fleeting encounters or temporary companionship. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by to check on Clara. She was a kind woman, always curious about the quiet widow and the mysterious cowboy who had appeared on the property. The neighbor smiled politely at Jace and then looked to Clara. "You've got someone helping you now," she said, her voice warm but teasing. Clara felt a flicker of embarrassment but also a small thrill. "He's helping," she said carefully. The neighbor nodded knowingly and left, leaving Clara and Jace alone. There was a moment of silence between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Clara realized that Jace's presence had become a part of her daily life, in a way that was subtle but undeniable. She felt a mixture of apprehension and hope, knowing that the connection they shared was growing stronger with each passing day. One evening, as the stars appeared and the moon cast a soft glow over the farm, Jace and Clara sat on the porch together. The air was cool, and the quiet of the night made the world feel smaller, more intimate. Jace spoke softly about his dreams, his regrets, and the longing he had carried for years. Clara listened, feeling a deep sense of empathy and understanding. "You've changed my life," Jace said quietly, his eyes meeting hers. "Not in a loud way, but in a way that matters. You've made me see that trust, patience, and care aren't weaknesses, they're strengths." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had been afraid of letting anyone in, of risking her heart again, but in Jace, she saw something different. He wasn't just persistent. He was respectful, thoughtful, and willing to meet her where she was. She realized that the walls she had built around herself could come down slowly, and that vulnerability didn't have to be frightening if it was shared with the right person. As the night deepened, they sat in companionable silence, listening to the soft sounds of the farm and the distant calls of night birds. Clara felt a sense of peace she had not experienced in years. She knew that life would continue to bring challenges, that their relationship would require patience, understanding, and effort. But she also knew that Jace's presence had opened a door, one that led to trust, companionship, and a growing bond that neither could deny. The days turned into weeks, and their connection continued to strengthen. Clara found herself laughing more, feeling more alive, and appreciating the simple joys of her farm with a renewed sense of purpose. Jace remained a constant presence, patient, respectful, and attentive, proving that his feelings were genuine and unwavering. Their bond became a source of strength, a reminder that love and trust could grow even after loss, and that unexpected encounters could lead to profound connections. Through shared work, quiet conversations, and moments of understanding, Clara and Jace began to truly see each other. They learned that love was not always about grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but about patience, care, and the willingness to meet someone where they are. The dangerous cowboy and the cautious widow had found common ground, and in doing so, had created a connection that was both tender and resilient. By the time the first frost of autumn arrived, Clara realized that her feelings for Jace had grown into something undeniable. She trusted him, valued his presence, and recognized the deep respect and care he had shown her. And Jace, for his part, understood that he had found more than admiration or attraction. He had found a woman who could inspire patience, loyalty, and love in a way that changed his life forever. The first frost of autumn had painted the farm with delicate white edges, and the chill in the air reminded Clara that the seasons were changing. The days were shorter now, and the evenings carried a quiet stillness that made her more aware of the warmth that Jace brought whenever he was near. He had become a constant presence in her life, but more importantly, he had become someone she could trust, someone whose patience and care had softened her heart without breaking the boundaries she had carefully set. Jace rode up to the farm one early morning, the rising sun glinting off his horse's coat. Clara watched him approach, a sense of calm mixed with anticipation settling over her. He had become part of her routine, part of the life she had built, but there was still a subtle tension, a question lingering in both their minds. How far could this connection go, and what would it mean for their futures? He dismounted and walked up the path to the house, a small smile playing on his lips. "Good morning," he said, his voice gentle, almost hesitant. Clara nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "Morning," she replied, her eyes meeting his. There was a silent understanding in that glance, a recognition of the journey they had shared and the bond they had nurtured carefully, day by day. They spent the morning tending to the farm together. Jace helped with repairs, moving tools and fixing broken fences, while Clara continued her work in the garden, pruning and preparing for the coming winter. The rhythm between them was comfortable, almost effortless, and yet it carried a depth that only came from shared trust and mutual respect. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic words, just the quiet understanding that they were each contributing to something larger than themselves. As the day wore on, a light snow began to fall, dusting the farm with a delicate white layer. Clara paused, brushing her hands on her apron, and looked out across the land. The sight was peaceful, almost magical, and she felt a sense of gratitude for the simple life she had, now shared with someone who had proven himself trustworthy and kind. Jay stood beside her, watching her reaction. "It's beautiful," he said softly, "kind of like new beginnings." Clara smiled, realizing the truth in his words. She had spent so many years in solitude, holding tightly to memories of the past and the life she had once known. But now, with Jace by her side, she felt the possibility of a future, one that included companionship, understanding, and love that had been patiently earned rather than forced. Over the next several weeks, their bond deepened even further. They shared long conversations on the porch during chilly evenings, sitting under blankets with cups of steaming tea, speaking quietly about dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. Clara began to realize that the walls she had built around her heart were no longer necessary. She could trust Jace, not only with her safety but with her emotions, her past, and her dreams. One evening, as they sat watching the stars appear in the clear winter sky, Jace turned to Clara with a seriousness that made her heart flutter. "Clara," he began, "I know I've made mistakes in the past. People think I'm dangerous. But with you, I want to be better. I want to stay to be someone you can rely on, not someone who leaves or causes fear." Clara looked into his eyes and saw the honesty there, the quiet determination that had always drawn her to him. She reached out, placing her hand on his. "Jace, you've already shown me that you can be trusted. You've been patient, caring, and respectful. I don't need grand promises. I just want us to continue this together." He smiled, relief and happiness lighting up his face. "Then we have something worth holding on to," he said, squeezing her hand gently. The winter brought its challenges, as the farm required more work to prepare for the cold months. But Clara and Jace faced them together, side by side. He helped chop wood, repair the roof, and care for the animals, while she planned meals, tended the garden, and ensured the household ran smoothly. Their partnership was built on mutual respect, cooperation, and the quiet joy of being together without needing to force moments of affection or drama. One particularly cold evening, a heavy snowstorm arrived, blanketing the farm and making travel impossible. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and Clara realized how much she had come to rely on Jace's presence. He moved through the house with ease, ensuring the animals were warm and fed, checking the roof for leaks, and making small, thoughtful gestures that showed his care without being overbearing. Clara watched him and felt a deep sense of gratitude. She knew that she had found someone who could be her partner in every sense, someone who could handle danger, responsibility, and vulnerability with equal measure. As the storm raged on, they sat together by the fireplace, the warmth of the flames reflecting the growing warmth between them. Words were few, but they were unnecessary. Their shared glances, gentle touches, and quiet presence spoke volumes. Clara realized that love did not always need dramatic declarations or grand gestures. It could be steady, patient, and enduring, growing stronger with each shared moment and act of care. The snowstorm eventually passed, leaving the farm covered in a pristine blanket of white. The days began to lengthen again, and spring approached slowly, bringing with it the promise of renewal and growth. Clara and Jace continued to work the land, care for the animals, and support each other in ways both practical and emotional. Their connection had grown into something resilient, capable of withstanding both the literal storms and the emotional challenges that life presented. One afternoon, Clara found herself standing at the edge of the garden, watching Jace repair a fence. She realized that she no longer feared letting him into her life. The dangerous reputation that had once made her wary now seemed distant and irrelevant. What mattered was the man before her, the one who had shown patience, respect, and unwavering care. She smiled, feeling a sense of peace and certainty she had not experienced in years. Jace looked up and caught her gaze, returning her smile with a warmth that mirrored her own feelings. He walked over, brushing the snow from his coat, and took her hand. "We've come a long way," he said softly, "and I don't want to go back to the way things were before." Clara squeezed his hand, feeling a mixture of relief, happiness, and quiet excitement. "Neither do I," she replied. "We've built something together, something real, steady, and worth protecting." They stood together, hand in hand, looking out over the farm. The years of solitude, fear, and loss had not been wasted. They had led Clara to this moment, to the realization that love could be found even in unexpected places, and that trust could be earned through patience and care. As the seasons continued to change, Clara and Jace faced challenges like any couple would: unexpected storms, work that needed attention, and moments of doubt. But through it all, they relied on each other, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They laughed, shared quiet moments, and built a life that balanced independence with companionship, solitude with shared joy. By the time the following winter arrived, Clara and Jace had settled into a rhythm that felt natural and comforting. They had learned to communicate without words at times, to anticipate each other's needs, and to support one another without demanding or controlling. Their relationship had evolved into one of mutual respect, trust, and love, steady, patient, and enduring. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, watching the snow fall gently around them, Clara reflected on the journey they had taken. The dangerous cowboy who had appeared at her gate months ago had become more than a visitor. He had become her partner, her confidant, and someone she could rely on completely. And Jace, in turn, had found a home not just on the farm, but in her heart. "You know," Jace said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence, "I never thought I'd find someone who could make me want to stay in one place. But you've shown me that it's possible." Clara smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "And you've shown me that trust and care can change everything," she replied. As the stars twinkled above and the quiet settled over the farm, they sat together, hand in hand, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Their journey had been one of patience, understanding, and slow, steady growth. It had begun with caution, curiosity, and a storm, and it had blossomed into a love built on trust, respect, and shared life. And in that quiet moment, with the world still and peaceful around them, Clara and Jace understood that they had found something rare and enduring, a love that was not hurried, not forced, and not fleeting, but one that had been carefully nurtured, patiently earned, and fully embraced.